Hello everybody and welcome back to another Captain's Academy episode with your instructor Chase, and today's video is a really comprehensive one that deals with all things to do with Citadels, Armor, as well as penetration. So anytime you have a question about, hey, why do I have to angle, why does my shot bounce, why do I not hit Citadels, then this video is definitely for you. But before I get started, there are two people I would actually like to thank, and one of them is FNordisk on the EU server, who's done some pretty awesome work on armor penetration curves, and I'm using his armor penetration numbers as sort of a reference, and it does help me explain some things to all of you. And of course, finally, I also have to thank Tedster on the NA server, who usually serves as somebody I go and double check and confirm things with. And of course, for this particular video, Tedster provided some very useful information to me regarding the Autobounce mechanic. But let's start with the easy topic first, which is Citadels, because now that we have the armor layout viewer, we're very easily going to be able to figure out where Citadels are. But once we get past the easy part, the rest of the video is actually going to be very detailed, but I'll try to make things as easy to understand as possible. So let's take a look at a very sort of well-known ship for having easy to hit Citadels, which is the Pensacola. Now if you open the armor layout, if you disable everything, and you just leave this vital areas part highlighted, you will see that the Pensacola has a chunk of its Citadel sitting outside of the water. That means above the waterline, and it's over here starting just a little bit ahead of the number 3 turret and extends pretty much all the way to just under the forward funnel. So this huge chunk over here is all above water, and it's a Citadel. Not only that, it is very weakly protected, having only 76 millimeters of armor. Now once you overlay every other piece of armor on top of it, you'll see that there is no additional protection. This 76 millimeters on the belt, that's all you've got. There is another piece that is sitting outside of the water just a little bit. That's under these forward turrets over here. There's a chunk here. This one is protected by a little bit thicker armor, 102 millimeters. So if you're shooting at a Pensacola, you'd want to be shooting into this area, the 76 millimeter area. Although if you have enough penetration, you can definitely go for the 102 millimeter area as well. But what I'm trying to get at is if you hit into the Citadel area, you are going to land Citadel hits and do massive amounts of damage. Let's take a look at some other ships, because Citadels, they're not all the same. In terms of their placement, they're very similar. They tend to be under the funnels, sort of in the middle of the ship, and sometimes under the gun turrets. But in terms of where they're located, it's not always the same. With the Pensacola, it was really obvious the Citadel is quite a bit above the waterline, but there are some ships where it isn't the case. Let's take a look at the North Carolina for a minute. Take a look at the North Carolina, and you'll notice something right away. You'll notice that it does have this very thick armor belt, right? It's 305 millimeters on top, a little bit above the water, and then there is another 305 millimeter belt that's under the water. Very thick belt armor that you've got to overcome first. But then once you take away that armor, take a look at the actual Citadel, and you'll notice that the actual Citadel, which is protected by that other 305 millimeter strip as well as a 165 millimeter strip, is actually below the waterline by quite a bit. In fact, the entire Citadel is underwater. So that means that if you're shooting at a North Carolina and you're shooting, let's say, at close range and you're firing shots horizontally, you're actually never really going to hit Citadels unless you get just some random RNG shot that gets it down there. But typically with the North Carolina up close, you're not going to get those Citadels. The only way you are going to get it on North Carolina is, let's say you're shooting from distance and your shells come in at a higher angle and they plunge through the deck armor, or they plunge through the weaker portions of the upper belt armor. So you'll see how there's the one on the waterline that's 305, but the one above it is only 32 millimeters. So if you get through that, then you're going to have to deal with the Citadel roof area, and you'll see that there's a really weak piece, only 19 millimeters thick, so you should be able to get through that. So the North Carolina, up close, not an easy target to Citadel because the Citadel is entirely underwater. However, the Iowa, on the other hand, if you look at its Citadel area, you'll notice something very different. It's got a nice thick piece of Citadel belt armor, 307 millimeters thick, but the Citadel is actually above water. So if you're able to get close and you shoot directly at this area when the eye was giving you a full broadside, and you have enough penetration to get through 307 millimeters, you're going to get those Citadel hits. So before I get into anything else, let me first show you broadside with ships in action, and then I'll explain some more complicated things regarding the armor as well as penetration. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be shooting at a Pensacola using a Shimakaze, and the Shimakaze is using the 127mm guns, and I have the sort of penetration table, and this is courtesy of F Nordisk, and by the way, you guys should really go check out his work. This guy has done some amazing stuff when it comes to these penetration arcs. So take a look at the Shimakaze's penetration values, and you can see that at 2,000 meters, it's about 165-ish, maybe, millimeters of penetration. And at 4,000 meters, it's about 120 millimeters of penetration. So that means that if I'm running into a Shimakaze and it's, say, roughly around 4 kilometers and it's showing me a broadside, if I use armor piercing and I hit the Citadel strip, I should be getting Citadel penetrations. So let's take a look at this in action, and let's see if this actually turns out to be true. So there's a Pensacola. This is a 3.9 kilometers, and I'm going to be shooting at the area where the Citadel is supposed to be. Bam. Armor piercing, 127 millimeters, no problem because I have enough penetration. I have 120 millimeters of penetration. Getting through that, hitting the Citadel, as long as, of course, RNG isn't sending my shot somewhere else. And when my shot goes somewhere else, I will either get penetration damage or I'll get over penetration damage, because let's say I'm hitting the upper portions of the Pensacola where the armor, let's say, is thinner, and I have too much penetration, it'll just go in one side, come out the other, and that is over pen damage, which is only 10% of your max AP shell damage, while penetration is 33%. So you'll see sometimes I'm getting the overpen, sometimes I'm getting penetration, but when I do hit it right, I'm definitely landing a good chunk of Citadel hits. Also, one of the reasons why if you're playing a cruiser, if you see a destroyer, you don't want to get too close to show broadside, because if a destroyer knows what they're doing, they will absolutely wreck your day. However, remember how on the Pensacola, only the forward Citadel and the middle Citadel is sort of above the water? The one at the back is actually a lot more underwater, and you'll see that when I shoot at the back area, I'm actually going to struggle to actually land anything. But if I go back to shooting at the area where the Citadel is above the water, Citadels, no problem at all. And so this is the first thing you have to know, is that the above water Citadels, much easier to hit. Underwater ones, a lot harder to hit at close range, will require you to get a little bit further away and get shells to drop down on it. So in this next clip, which is a different test than the previous one, I'm going to look at the Zao. And I'm also going to try the Zao against both the North Carolina and the Iowa, and to show you what the Citadel differences mean. So as you remember earlier, the North Carolina Citadel is pretty much all underwater, and the only way you're really going to be able to hit that Citadel is if you manage to plunge the shells in from above. If you're up close and you try to pen horizontally, you're not going to get anything. Now the Zao has pretty good penetration. According to the curve, at 1 kilometer, which is where you see the green line, the Zao's penetration is just a touch under 500 millimeters, which means that I should be able to get through the North Carolina's belt armor, no problem, get penetrations, but I shouldn't be able to hit the Citadel. So let's try this out. So I'm aiming under the smokestacks, which is where the North Carolina's got that Citadel area, and I'm going to fire. And even though I do massive numbers of penetration damage, in excess of, well, in this case, 18,000, you do not see a single Citadel penetration, because the Citadel is actually located completely underwater. For me to hit it, I have to come in from a higher angle, and coming in like straight like this is not going to get me anything. It will get me plenty of penetration damage, but nothing in terms of Citadel damage. Now the exact same test, but against an Iowa, and you'll see the difference. With the Iowa, if I aim under the funnels, I will be getting Citadels, because all I have to do is make it through that armor protection, and the Citadel sitting above the water. So take a look at this. There's 10 Citadels, 54,000 damage on this Iowa. So that is the difference between the ships that have Citadels above water and Citadels that are completely underwater. Now that we've sort of gotten the whole Citadel thing out of the way, now things get a little bit more complicated, because here I'm going to be talking about how every time you shoot, does it dictate whether you pen, whether you bounce, whether you hit citadels, etc. So during the next little while, I'm going to be talking about the auto bounce mechanic. I'll talk about the overmatch mechanic. Then I'll talk about how armor angling and penetration and normalization affect your gameplay. So typically what happens when you shoot at a target is the first thing that is, I guess, checked is whether you have auto bounced or not. Once that is done, if you don't auto bounce, then it goes and deals with whether or not you penetrate the armor based on armor angling, etc. However, if your gun overmatches the armor, then auto bounce doesn't get checked and you skip straight to whether or not your gun pens based on your penetration normalization and of course the enemy ship's armor and armor angling. So first things first, let's talk about auto bounce. So Tester was super helpful in providing me information regarding the auto bounce mechanic, and how it works is that it starts at 45 degrees at, let's say, just a tiny bit above 0%. So that is basically a very minuscule chance of you auto bouncing a shell. However, it increases in a linear fashion from 45 degrees all the way to 60, and at 60 degrees it becomes a 100% chance to auto bounce. So that means that while your chances of auto bouncing at 45 degrees is tiny, every single degree extra of angle that you have gives something around the range of about 6.3% chance to auto bounce a shell until you reach the maximum 100% at 60 degrees of angle. And so when you are dealing with, let's say, an enemy ship, you have to pay attention to how much angle you're providing that enemy ship. If you're giving it, now let's say 45 degrees, you're going to have very low chances of auto bouncing. But even if you give it like a couple extra degrees, your auto bounce chance increases significantly. Alright, so let's go take a look at the Shimakaze versus the Pensacola again. So I have a Pensacola 1.9 kilometers away from me, and I'm shooting at that 76 millimeters worth of armor in the middle. Now the Shimakaze at 2 kilometers has just over 160 millimeters worth of penetration. So as you can see, when I'm at this angle, and I'll explain things about normalization and everything in a little bit, but at this angle, I'm still able to land some pretty consistent Citadel hits with the occasional bounce, but Citadel is really consistent. Alright, so now I'm going to move the Shima just a little bit. I'm not moving it too much. I'm shifting it, I'm guessing around 10, maybe 15 degrees. And take a look what happens when I make that shift. So I go from being roughly 45 degrees to maybe, this is about 50 some odd degrees, right? 50, maybe 55, let's say. And immediately we'll see what happens. I'm starting to bounce shells. And I'm starting to bounce a lot of them. Now occasionally you will still see a shell squeak in there, and I'm still going to land that Citadel. That's because the percentage chance of the auto bounce is not 100% yet. It's very high, but not 100%. So occasionally a shell will still get in there, get past the auto bounce mechanic, and still give me the actual Citadel because I still have enough penetration to actually get through the angled armor. So this is the first thing you really have to know, which is this auto bounce mechanic. When you're angled, if you start at 45, you're going to have a very low chance. But as you increase that angle, ever closer to 60 degrees, you're going to have more and more auto bounces. Now, this auto bounce mechanic is also one of the reasons why you see a lot of battleships going bow in. So the New Mexico, which if you look at the armor viewer, the New Mexico only has 25 millimeters of armor. And the Congo at 0.8 kilometers has tons of penetration. And yet, because of the angle of this bow to my guns, I can fire at this New Mexico's bow all day long, and pretty much all I'm ever going to get is bounces, unless RNG just sends my shot somewhere else completely. But here we go. There's 7 bounces in a row off the bow, because this bow is so heavily angled that with this Congo, I can sit here and just keep shooting and shooting, and I can just keep shooting for days, and this New Mexico will do nothing but bounce. And this is one of the first reasons why the overmatch mechanic is so important. Because if you have a gun big enough that you can overmatch the armor, you don't have to worry about auto bouncing at all. So here's another salvo on the New Mexico's bow. 8 bounces. And this is the strength of angling your armor, is that it's not just increasing your armor thickness, it is also increasing your chances of actually just auto bouncing shells that are fired at you. So what is this overmatch mechanic that you're talking about? Well, the overmatch in World of Warships is that if your gun caliber is 14.3 times greater than the armor that is currently in the auto bounce state, then you're going to be able to ignore the auto bounce and you're going to go straight into the penetration formula. So for the New Mexico, which has 25 millimeters of bow armor, like I said, I could sit there and fire at its bow all day long with 356 millimeter guns, and I will not be able to overmatch it because the required overmatch is a little bit higher. However, against the 19 millimeter bow of the New York, if I do 19 times 14.3, I will be able to overmatch, and even though I'm shooting at the exact same spot, take a look, same spot, I'm going to be shooting at this New York's bow, I'm going to be able to penetrate, and potentially even penetrate the Citadel. So here we go. Well, would you look at that? I'm getting penetration damage. And so, comparatively speaking, the New Mexico, which just shrugged off my shells, the New York cannot. Interestingly enough, if you actually look at the battleships, it's quite interesting. Tier 6 battleships, even though they pack the same size guns as the Tier 5 ones, are superior because they can overmatch Tier 5 bows, but the Tier 5 battleships cannot overmatch Tier 6 bows. But Tier 6 battleships cannot overmatch the bow of Tier 7 battleships, but the Tier 7 battleships can overmatch Tier 6 bows, and you'll see that trend sort of continue up until about Tier 8, in which case it kind of stops until all the way at Tier 10, with the Yamato being the lone exception. So again, taking another salvo against the New York. And would you look at that? See, overmatch is awesome. Once you complete that first phase, which is the auto bounce / overmatch phase, the next phase you got to deal with is penetration, enemy armor, armor angling, as well as shell normalization. So there's a whole bunch of things here to talk about. First things first, even though we don't have the exact numbers, this is pretty much where we think things are right now in terms of how much armor angling affects your armor values. So at 0 degrees, which means your ship is completely, fully broadside, your armor is exactly what the numbers in the armor viewer say your armor is. However, if you are at 10 degrees, then you gain an additional 1% of effective armor. If you're at 20 degrees, you gain 6% additional effective armor. At 30 degrees, you gain 15%, and so on and so forth. At probably around 59 degrees, you're probably just under 200% increase in effective armor. Now, from my testing, this armor angling thing works in 2 ways. So one, if you physically position your ship at a certain degree angle to another ship, you gain that sort of boost to your effective armor. The other way this works is that, let's say you are fully broadside to something and somebody's shooting at you and the shells are coming down at an arc. The angle which the shell falls and impacts your armor, that also, I think, applies these particular multipliers. So let's say you are fully broadside on with a ship, and let's say somebody shoots at you and the shell comes down at, let's say, 40-degree angle, and it hits that side broadside armor that you're flat on with them. But because they're hitting that armor at a 40-degree angle, you will gain an additional 30%. And if that shell does not have enough penetration, it won't go through. However, if it does have enough penetration, then it will go through. So think about this as just the armor angling aspect for now. Then we've got to talk about shell normalization, and once I talk about that, then we can go into some actual examples. So right now in World of Warships, these are the shell normalization values, and they've sort of been simplified a little bit. So if you're running guns up to 139 millimeters, you have 10 degrees of normalization. If you have between 140 to 152 millimeters, you have 8.5 degrees of normalization. 153 to 240, 7 degrees of normalization, And if you have 241 millimeters and beyond, you have 6 degrees of normalization. So what is normalization? Well, normalization is, let's say if you remember the previous picture where you had the ship that is having a shell fall down at 40-degree angle. Let's say you are using a destroyer and your shell is falling down at, let's say, that crazy 40-degree angle. Well, because you have a shell normalization of 10 degrees, that 10 degrees, when the shell hits the armor, it'll adjust its angle by 10 degrees, which means you're really going to be hitting that ship's armor at 30 degrees. So instead of dealing with the 40-degree boost to their armor, you're now going to be dealing with 30 degrees. So let's say now you're dealing with the ship-to-ship angling and not the vertical one, the horizontal one, right? The same thing applies. Let's say you are targeting a ship that's at a 40-degree angle from you. Well, because of the 10 degree of shell normalization, now you're at really a 30-degree angle. So their armor angling is a little bit less effective. And okay, so let's take everything we now know about armor angling, normalization, and let's put it to the test. So we're going back to Shimakaze and Pensacola again. So we know that the Pensacola, 76 millimeters of armor on the Citadel. Now, using this chart, I'm looking at the numbers, and I see that at least it's not perfect, but it's as close as I can get it. Is that 76 millimeters of penetration is roughly around 6.7 kilometers, so 6,700 meters from the target. For 80 millimeters of penetration, the Shimakaze has to be within about 6.5 kilometers, 6,500 meters, on a fully broadside target. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the test where I'm shooting at a fully broadside Pensacola. And then I'm going to show you what a little bit of angling can do for the Pensacola. So first up, I'm shooting at a fully broadside Pensacola, pretty much a 90-degree angle, and I'm shooting at this Pensacola from 6.7 kilometers. Now, sped up the clip a little bit just to make things a little bit faster. But as much as I shoot at this Pensacola, you do not see me penetrating that Citadel area at all. I just do not have enough penetration at this range. Right? So I keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting. No real luck. I do get penetration hits on the upper armor, which is thinner than the Citadel armor, but for the life of me, at 6.7 kilometers on a fully broadside target, I just cannot for the life of me pen a Pensacola. So, need to make a little bit of an adjustment. Need to look at my data and go, alright, well at 6.7 kilometers, I only have 76 millimeters of pen. I need to be at 6.6 to have a little bit more. So, time to move my ship a little bit over, and I'm going to get a tiny little bit closer. So there we go, move the ship, there it is. Ship is now closer, 6.6 kilometers. Fire salvo, and there you go. There are the Citadel hits. Now, you might be asking, well, look, the shells are sort of arcing up when they hit the ship. Isn't there that vertical angle thing to worry about? Well, to the best of my ability, and that means like actually doing slow motion and trying to put an angle and everything, it looks like when the shells actually reach the target, it's at about 10, maybe 15 degrees. And with the 10 degree of shell normalization that the Shimakaze has, it's basically like hitting something that's flat on. And so that's why at 6.6 kilometers, I'm able to land Citadel hits. Assuming RNG blesses me. RNG does do its weird thing every once in a while. There you go, there's another Citadel. So then, how does a little bit of angling help? Well, same distance, 6.6 kilometers, where I was able to pen that belt when I was flat on. Now, I'm a little bit shy of 40 degrees. I think I'm like 30 something, maybe 35, I think, something like that. So now I'm shooting at this Pensacola at 6.6 kilometers, but this Pensacola is angled around, like I said, 35 degrees away from me. With the 10 degrees of shell normalization, it means that this Pensacola has about an effective angle about 25 degrees roughly. So even though we look at our chart and we don't have the exact number for 25 degrees, it's somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees. So we're guessing an armor multiplier of, let's say, 1.1. So this will give the Pensacola, with that 76 millimeters of Citadel armor, it'll give it now an effective armor of 83.6 millimeters. So try as I might, sitting at this angle, firing at that belt at the same distance where when broadside on, it worked, I will not score a Citadel hit at all. And so this is what the armor angling aspect of the game helps you with. If you stay angled to things, ships will have trouble, much more trouble penetrating you than if you were just broadside on. So now that we've covered everything, right? Now that we've covered everything, here's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind when you're actually playing the game. One, angling will save your life loads of times because angling will allow for things like auto bouncing. And of course, if you exceed 60 degrees, you have a 100% chance to auto bounce. This is the reason why we see all those bow-on battleships at the higher tiers. The second thing you have to remember is overmatch. You have to know what ships your guns can overmatch so that if they're trying to angle, you know where to shoot. Ideally, if you can overmatch the thinnest part of their armor, go for it. And then finally, let's say you are engaging two different ships at once, right? Let's say they're coming from two different directions. Well, try to maximize your angling to both of them so that both maximizes your auto bouncing and also maximizes your armor and reduces the chance of you taking damage. Anyways, folks, I hope this video has been helpful explaining all the mechanics behind armor angling and penetration and overmatch and auto bouncing and things like normalization. If you have any questions, please do leave those in the comment section below. I also am going to put the links to the penetration curves in the video description below. Anyways, folks, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.